Welcome back, guys. So this is going to be part 2 of this RVF750 video. So just to recap, in part 1 I made a complete cat's ass of diagnosing whether there was fuel pressure or not. Now I'm confident we have fuel pressure and a good flow of fuel. It is going to need a new fuel filter. There's one on order that's coming tomorrow, but it's got a, if you watch part 1 you'll see what I did. It's got a slightly bodgy fuel filter in at the moment, just to enable us to do sort of carry on with the testing. So it's got fuel pressure. The test I did, putting a little bit of fuel down the inlet ports and cranking it, and it fires up immediately, confirms my suspicion that it's definitely lean during cold start. So now I'm interested in, now I know I've got fuel pressure, I'm interested in how the ECU is commanding the injectors. So for those of you that don't know, and I'm sorry if I'm teaching some of you to suck eggs, but the way a fuel injected engine gets, I mean, there are variations, but generally with motorbikes, the way it gets more or less fuel, there is a constant fuel pressure through the fuel rail to the 4 injectors, and then the engine ECU commands the injector open for a period of time. The more time the injector's open for, the more fuel the engine's going to get. So I'm measuring with my oscilloscope, and I'll show you on the screen of the tablet the waveform, and you can see physically how long the injector's been held open for as the engine's cranking. So then we'll get a sense of whether there's something wonky with the way the engine ECU is controlling the injectors, or whether there's something else going on. I suspect maybe blocked injectors, given how dirty that fuel filter was. They've probably never been out the throttle bodies in their entire life. Anyway, let me take you to the laptop and I'll show you that setup, and I'll explain a little bit more about what we're going to measure and how we're measuring it. So I've got 2 channels of my scope hooked up. So both of the grounds are going to battery negative, and then the 2 positive wires, if you like, so the green and the red, they're going to, how to explain, so the injectors on most modern motorcycles are what you would called ground side switched. So the injector is basically a little solenoid. There's 2 wires going to it. There's a winding inside that creates an electromagnet which opens the pintle on the injector. So they have a constant positive to 1 wire of going to the injector, which comes from the, from the ignition, when the ignition's on, from the kill switch through a fuse and stuff obviously, but they have a live, and then they're switched on and off by the negative side. So the way you wire for testing, you have the negative terminal of your scope to the battery negative, and then the positive wire from the scope into the ground wire, the wire that's been switched on the injector, if that makes sense. Right, let me show you what's going on the scope screen. Yeah, I'm not sure this is going to work, is it? It's quite reflecty. Let me figure out how to do a screen capture. I know I can do that, and that'll make it a lot easier to view this screen. Right, so we should be in business, should be able to see that screen now properly. So I'm just going to do 1 channel at a time. So channel B, which is, forget which cylinder, but it's hooked up to one of the injectors. We'll have a trigger just to make life easier, so we don't fill my buffer up. This isn't a scope lesson, so I won't I won't bore you with it, but what do we got? We got 10 milliseconds per division on the scope here, and we've got 200 volt peak to peak. Let's not get into that. Let me crank it now and watch this screen. Oh, hang on, we've got a, yeah, the scope is running. Contact. Okay, so the reason I've got a trigger set, like I said, not a scope lesson, but it means that it stops capturing waveforms when it stops getting a signal. It just makes it easier to go back through. So we go here to this waveform, like this buffer, and we'll pick one that's got quite a few on it. Now then, what we want to do is, let's zoom in on here. So if we zoom in on a section, try and do this. Let's pick one of these, so let's do this one. And what we're interested in is, let's minimize that out of the way. I'm interested in how long this injector's been held open for. Let's zoom in a bit more. Whoa, get rid of that. Okay, so we drag a couple of cursors across and put them roughly on there. So we got 2.32 milliseconds. That's about in the ballpark. It would definitely run at that. And then the other thing we're interested in is whether this has been pulled to ground. So we can pull this cursor down here and we can see, what have we got on the ground? We've got 846 millivolts on the ground. So that's all right. The ground's good enough. It's been pulled to ground. It's open for long enough. And then some of these down the end here, I was opening the throttle a bit. So let's see, let's get rid of this. Sorry, this might be really boring for a lot of you, sorry. I think some of these should be a bit wider because I was opening the throttle. Let's have a look. What do we got there? Yeah, look at that, massive. So 7.3. So it's hard to see on the screen, isn't it? But there's a lot more fuel. Let's just check that ground because that looks different, but I think it's the way the... Yeah, that's fine. That's what I can do. Is I need to zoom in a little bit more on there. I could actually, can I get rid of that? Yeah, that's fine. That's better, isn't it? And you can also change. Crikey, I don't want to turn this into a scope lesson, but look, if I change the voltage scaling, it just makes it a bit more dramatic. It basically gives me more resolution on the vertical there, so I can zoom in a bit more. Anyway, that confirms. So the injectors, they're opening. I mean, it should definitely be running. It's getting a lot of fuel there, or theoretically it's getting a lot of fuel there. 7.3 milliseconds, that's a lot, but I had the throttle cracked a little bit to try and get it to fire. Right, okay. I'm going to take the injectors out. That's what I'm going to do. Right, stand by. Let's get these injectors out. We can do a little bit of testing of injectors. Sorry for the scope waffleage, but some of you might find it interesting. Yeah, so to get the injectors out, let's get these. I'm trying to work around this camera. Let's get those wires out of the way. They're reasonably easy to get out. So per injector, there's this little cast piece here. So 2 bolts. That little cap pops off. Undo the wire, and the injector should just come out. So let's get the 4 injectors out, and I'll set up my injector testing machine, and we can see what's going on. Hopefully that's the issue, because it's definitely lean. I could find my 8mm spanner. Okay guys, injector testing. I don't want to go down a injector testing rabbit hole with this video. It's long enough as it is. So Houston, we have a problem with these injectors. Start this machine going. The atomization, I mean, this one on this side is basically a bloody hose pipe. It's not atomizing at all. It's hard for the camera. The camera doesn't pick it up particularly well, unfortunately. But we have an issue. I mean, let's stop this. We have an issue. So, I'm not going to share this bit with you. Yeah. If I can remember when I'm editing, I'll put a link in the description, or one of those little poppy out things up here, because there are other videos on the channel about injector servicing, so you can go, if you really want to understand the process, you can go and watch something else rather than me boring you with it in this video. I'm going to service these injectors. Fuel filter's coming tomorrow. I'm going to put it back together, see where we're at. I think you're in danger when you're doing diagnostic work of sort of changing too many things. Do you see what I mean? And getting yourself tied in knots. So I'm going to get these serviced, new filters, ultrasonically clean, so we've got nice atomization. Make sure they're all good. New fuel filter, put it back together, and let's assess at that point, I think, before we get too carried away. Right, see you on the other side. Mobile phone video. Yeah, these injectors are not playing ball. I'll do it on a constant flow, 100% duty, just so you can see. That one on the end, this one. I know I've moved the injectors around, sorry, just to cause confusion. The other three acceptable, and I've cleaned and cleaned and cleaned them. And I've cleaned them in. I've got a special way of doing them when they're really bad, using, I won't bore you with it, but using some very strong chemical and putting the end of the injector in the chemical and allowing the injector to suck the chemical up inside, and that little pot that's got the chemical in is also in the ultrasonic tank. So they're as clean as they're ever going to be. They're quite well balanced, but atomization is very poor. I'm not quite sure which way I'm going to skin this now, because they're unobtainium. I'm going to ring Asnew up, my injector company, and see if there's something that will match them closely. The problem is with bike injectors, they're quite low. These are 260 cc's per minute at 3 bar, which is, you know, not a lot of fuel for a fuel injector really, but then it's only a little engine in it in terms of cc. I need to have a cup of tea and have a think. Rightio, okay guys, it's a couple of days later again. I keep having to leave this thing alone and do other jobs and come back to it, but it's kind of good because I wanted it absolutely freezing cold. It's first thing in the morning, quite early. It's quite cold here in the workshop. The issue I've got not the issue I've got, but diagnosing this cold start, the moment you get any sort of heat in the engine, the problem goes away. So I wanted to do some testing on an absolutely completely cold engine that hadn't fired at all. So where are we up to? I've gone around the houses a little bit with this, and I feel like, what am I trying to say? When you're doing diagnostic work, it's very easy to sort of find yourself getting pulled from one place to the next, and if you're not careful, you lose your thread, if you see what I mean. I'm trying to think of a good analogy. So if you ever do any sort of DIY work, I've been renovating my bloody house for the last 10 years, and you find you get to a point with a job where you've got tools and you've got rubbish everywhere, and you're just like, you know what, let's just put everything away, all my tools away, clean everything and reset and go again. And that's sort of a good analogy for diagnostic work. Sometimes you need to sort of put all your tools away, find yourself in a known position, and then restart your thought process. Does that make sense? Or am I talking shit? Anyway, that said, the reason I'm waffling on about that is, so the injectors have been serviced, ultrasonically cleaned to death, new filter baskets, etc. I've improved the atomization on definitely on 3 of them. The other one is, the bad one is slightly better, and they're quite well balanced. Insert a video here that I think I did on my mobile phone for that. Yeah, so that's the injectors look okay, or not okay. There's an issue with one of them, but that's certainly not the reason why it's not starting from cold. So I'm back to my scoping. I just want to see what these injectors do on a completely cold engine. I want to see what, you know, how what's the word? I can never think of the right word. I want to see what the duty cycle is. I want to see the pulse width that the ECU's commanding on a completely cold engine. So the scope's hooked up. Stop waffling. I'm going to do a crank now. Try and start it. Record the waveform. I'll put the waveform on the screen, and then we can maybe have a bit of a talk about that. Okay guys, so we need to excuse me, I'm trying to work around this camera. Let's go zoom in on one of these. Incidentally, did you see, oh, I won't go back now, but down, yeah, let's not do that. Sorry, fucking brains all over the place this morning. Yeah, 3.1 milliseconds. And then, what's the other one doing? The other cylinder. Going to need to zoom in on this. Zoomage. Get rid of that. Even my laptop is going slow this morning. What the hell is going on? Right, okay, that's better. What we got there? 2.7. Okay, that's probably not enough fuel. And what's the ground like? Have we got a good? I know it's been pulled to ground fine. Yeah, like 398 millivolts on the ground. Okay, this calls for a cup of coffee. Let me have a think. Right, okay. Bit of internet research and a bit of thinking, because I'll tell you what, the genuine Honda workshop manual for this is absolute dog shit. There's no useful information in it really. There's loads of Mickey Mouse flow charts for if it's broken. Complete waste of time really. Anyway, so a little bit of reading online. Every day's a school day, as they say. These idle mixture adjustment pots here, apparently if you disconnect them, it defaults to a fuel map as if the engine's at 80 degrees C. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that makes, you know, that makes reasonable sense to me, because a lot of these fuel injected systems on cars and bikes, the ECU, the engine computer, will have a default strategy for if it loses some data PIDs. So there's some stuff it can't lose and it can't carry on running, like a crank signal or something like that, but something like that's mission critical. But if it loses an air temperature sensor or a water temperature sensor, we'll get to that in a minute actually, water temperature sensor, if it loses some of the inputs, it will just have a default map, so at least the engine will keep running. And then people talk about limp mode, where you get reduced performance, just so you can actually get home, if you like. The engine check light will obviously be on. Anyway, wafflage. So what I've done is I've done two. I'll flash them on the screen now. So I did a cranking, trying to get it started with this all connected up, and then I did another crank, and I'll flash the screens on the screen grabs on the screen now. I did another one with these disconnected, and I'm basically getting the same-ish pulse width, so around 3 milliseconds. Now, engine at 80 degrees needs a hell of a lot less fuel than an engine trying to start from absolutely stone cold. So it's definitely under injecting, because I think I was getting, and the cylinders vary slightly, but I was getting somewhere between 2.8 I think and 3 milliseconds with these disconnected. So that would suggest that the 2 point something 3 milliseconds I'm getting when it's trying to cold start is just not enough fuel. So what am I going to do next? Okay, $64,000 question. Next thing I'm going to do is I just want to have a quick look at what the fuel map in this power commander is. The guy had said categorically that it was exactly the same before he had the power commander fitted, but I just want to see what's going on in there, just for my own peace of mind. And I can't, ideally I'd just like to disconnect it and get it out of the picture, but it's been hardwired into the loom, so that's, I mean, that in itself makes me slightly nervous, but we're just going to have to accept that for what it is. have a look what the map's doing. And then the next obvious point, now we know it's under injecting, is water temperature sensor, and the 5-volt reference to that. That's where I'm going next, but I'm going to have a quick look at this power commander map, see what's going on. Onwards. Okay guys, so this is the map. I'll take a screen grab of this and put it up on the screen. The bit I was interested in is this 0% throttle at lower, at like 500 RPM, which is basically cranking. They are adding a little tiny bit of extra fuel at cranking, interestingly, but they're certainly not taking any fuel away, which is what I was worried about. So yeah, assuming the power commander is working correctly, and there's no reason to assume it isn't, because apparently it makes good power on the dyno and stuff, this bike, then the PC power commander map isn't the issue. So next thing is I'm going to go after this water temperature sensor. I mean, I could yeah, let's not get into that now. Water temperature sensor. Hey guys, so quite difficult to film this, but my hand is jammed in between the V of this engine. The coolant temperature sensor is on the back of this front cylinder head. That's what we're getting. 2.78k, so 2.7 thousand ohms. That's basically correct. It's quite cold here in that. Get my hand out. It's quite cold here in the workshop this morning, and the spec in the book, I'll flash it on the screen, it's 2.3 to 2.7 or something at 20 degrees C, and it's more like 10 degrees C. So I think we can safely assume that that sensor's doing its thing. And bizarrely, I'll flash you another picture. I think it's a brand new sensor. So part of the parts shotgun, one of the cartridges was a water temperature sensor. Let's test the reference voltage now coming out of the ECU. So 5-volt reference is bang on the money. What the fuck is wrong with this motorbike? Also just double checking, doing some continuity checks between the wire from the coolant temperature sensor that goes to the ECU. Yeah, just making sure there's continuity and it don't go to ground at all, so that's all fine. I think I'm going to go after these. There's just no information, you know, about the. Hang on, stand by. I know this is mobile phone, and I apologise. There's just no information about setting these up. I've taken these out, and they should have little rubber caps on the back, and the caps are gone, so, and the screws look messed with, but I can't find any information about, you know, there's nothing in the Honda shop manual about this. Sorry if it sounds windy, it's because it is, and I got the workshop door open and it's a shitty day. I think what I might do a bit of experimentation. So I'll hook my scope up and I'll adjust these screws and see how that affects the pulse width as it's cranking. Video cut out then for some reason, sorry guys. Yeah, I'm going to hook my scope up and see focus, see how moving these screws adjusts the pulse width. I don't want to make it rich when it's, you know, when it's warmed up though, that's the issue. Let's have a little bit of experimentation, I think. Guys, sorry, I'm sticking with the mobile phone, it's just easier than fucking about with my camera. So I'll flash them on the screen. I've just done some screen grabs, but I've got these pots, you know, out, ready to adjust. You can see they've been messed with. I've just done a comparison between cylinder number 1 and number 2. This is number 1, which is getting 2.9, nearly, well, 3 seconds a 3 second, bloody hell, I can't speak, 3 milliseconds of fuel, and cylinder 2 is getting 2.5. I just wonder whether it's something to do with the way these have been adjusted. Somebody's obviously been fiddling. and the chances are when they were fiddling they weren't paying this much attention to what was going on. So I'm going to start adjusting these now. I'll just start with cylinder 1, which is yeah, this one I think. Hang on, where's my wires going? Yeah, this is cylinder 1. So we've got 2.9 there. I'm going to have a twiddle of this screw and see what difference it makes. So a little bit of experimentation. So these screws, so the difference between fully in and fully out, that's the screw fully in, 2.84, and let me just move it and get another graph. Right, and that's with the screw anti-clockwise all the way out, so 3.2, nearly 3.3, so half a millisecond of fuel difference from one extreme to the other on that screw. If you've got an RC45 and you're wondering how much adjustment you've got, and all these were almost all the way in, so almost at the most lean point. Crikey, I wonder if it's just that. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the airbox back on, put it all back together as it should be. I've got other stuff to be getting on with. I've got a cam chain to do on this thing today, so I've got plenty going on. Put it all back together, leave these in the richest position, try a cold start first thing tomorrow morning when it's freezing cold, and let's see where we go. I'll be interested in, if it does start, is it going to be too rich once it's warmed up? But we can, you know, we have the technology, gas analyzer, etc. So although we can't do, annoyingly you can't do individual cylinders, you know, you've got to, well, you can do, I don't know what's wrong with my phone. I think it only does like 1 minute 30 clips or something. Sorry, I was in mid-sentence then. Yeah, you can't do individual cylinders, so you've got to sort of do an average. But being able to see pulse width, at least we'll be able to balance those screws. Anyway, I'm waffling. I'm going to put it together, I'm going to let it go cold, and let's see what tomorrow morning brings.